Story 1. Losing a pet is terrible. Pet grief is particularly challenging because there is not a lot of support for it. Research shows that losing a pet can be just as difficult as losing a close friend or family member, but it is not taken as seriously by society. Therefore, you do not receive bereavement leave from work, and people often do not reach out with support. Some treat it as trivial. Society tends to expect you to move on with your life and continue with your routine, while in reality, you may be drowning in grief. It is a horrible experience that can make those going through it feel even worse. Additionally, I learned from a commenter that hospice providers may offer pet bereavement support. I wanted to share this for anyone navigating pet loss. Story 2. We raised him from a kitten, and he was the only cat I ever knew that would respond to his name and come running to you from wherever he was in the house when you called him. He suddenly became extremely sick while I was at work one day, and by the time I got home, we knew it was too late even for a veterinarian. He died while I was holding him, and it devastated me. I cannot explain why that affected me more than any friend or family member I have lost, but it did, and I still think about that fuzzy little creature every day. Story 3. My daughter was born alive at 23.5 weeks and weighed 1.5 pounds. But the hospital policy stated that they would not intervene with life-saving measures until 24 weeks. She died in my arms an hour after birth. She was incredibly beautiful and perfect in every way. I will never forget her. Story 4. Watching someone you love continuously make poor choices that harm them to the point where you can no longer be around them is incredibly difficult. You may find yourself having to say goodbye because, no matter what you say or do, they continue to not improve their situation. Story 5. I was at the veterinarian's office when they had to put my dog down, a half collie and half Labrador, because of an infection in her kidneys. One moment she was there and then they injected her and she was suddenly gone. I haven't cried that hard in a long time. Story 6. My daughter was on life support but was declared brain dead. Other than the machines, she looked like she was sleeping. She had listed herself as an organ donor, so they had to keep her on life support while awaiting the transplant team. Walking out of that room was the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my life. I hate that day. Story 7. For me, it was the goodbye I never got to say. I was on a work trip when my beloved cat, who was almost 18 years old, had to be put down. I had him since he was a kitten, and he was with me through thick and thin. I left him with my parents during that trip. This was in 2011, and I still feel I didn't get the closure I needed. Rest in peace, Tabby. You were the sweetest boy. Story 8. I have said goodbye to many dogs over the course of my life, 11 so far. By far the hardest has been my soulmate dog, Hazel. It has been almost 2 years, and it is still devastating. She was not just part of my heart. She was my heart. It has been like losing a limb. I will never recover. Story 9. To my beautiful daughter, she was 12 and already unresponsive by the time I arrived at the hospital. I have been told that hearing is one of the last senses to leave us, so I pray she heard me talking to her and telling her how important and loved she is. She will be gone for 3 years this month. Her birthday is in June, and she would be turning 16 this year. Story 10. My husband died last week unexpectedly, and it still doesn't feel real. We were together for almost 14 years. He was only 34, and now I'm a widow at 30. Feels like I'm drowning. Story 11. The one I didn't get to say. My dad went into cardiac arrest when I was in college, and I was about 3 hours away. I drove as fast as I could in a snowstorm and was about an hour from him when my brother called and gave me the news. That was tough. I was so close, but truly not really. Story 12. A year ago, I had to say goodbye to my dog of 15 years. I didn't know I was capable of crying so hard for so long. I love dogs so much, but I'm hesitant to get another because that experience was so painful. Story 13. Either my mom may have been a pain, but she was my pain, or my best friend. It hurt even if cutting them off was the right thing to do. Story 14. When we had to put our family dog down a few years ago, we had her since I was 12 or 13 years old, and I was 25 when she died. I held her on the car ride to the veterinarian until they injected her. She was sick with an infection, and I knew she would be hurting if we kept her alive. It really hurt, and I'm getting emotional thinking about it. Story 15. My ex and I loved each other very much and tried everything to make our relationship work, but we were wrong for each other. Love wasn't enough. I also had my dog for 13 years, who was by my side during the hardest times of my life. Story 16. This may seem trivial compared to many things, but leaving my hometown after spending my whole life there is significant. Seeing all the friends I had known for 18 years and realizing that I would probably never see most of them again still resonates with me. Story 17. When I had to say goodbye to my beloved flying squirrel, Rufus. Normally, they can live as long as 15 years in captivity, but he had diabetes and passed away at 4.5. The night he died, I could tell something was wrong. He was moving awkwardly and sluggishly. When I picked him up, he was already starting to feel cool to the touch, a telltale sign that the end is near for small animals. So I wrapped him in the sweatshirt I wore when he was a baby, held him, and sang the silly little songs I always sang to him until he was gone. Then I sat alone in my apartment and wept. You wouldn't think that you could love a little rodent so much, but he was truly my only companion through some very difficult times. Story 18. My mother. I had a very tumultuous relationship with my mother for most of my life. She was an alcoholic and a chronic liar who would betray anyone just to make herself feel better. When she became ill with lung cancer, she sobered up, and within 6 months she became almost a normal human being. For the first time in maybe 30 years, I felt there was actual contact and the basis for a real relationship, but I realized it would also involve getting to know her all over again. The hardest thing I ever did was say goodbye the last time I saw her. I live about 100 miles from where she used to live, and I knew that it might be the last time I saw her alive. She died less than 48 hours later. Story 19. I have a 13-year-old cat that I have had since he was a kitten. He declined drastically over a week, and I struggled to decide to put him down. My mind could not accept it. I spent $3,500 trying to save his life. The veterinarian suggested euthanasia while I was there, but I couldn't go through with it. I brought him home for one last night together. I woke up early in the morning and found him stumbling around. He fell and hit his chin on the ground. I told myself that I had to make the difficult decision. I put him in his crate and he died right there. I will never forgive myself for not putting him down peacefully and for allowing him to suffer for a week. Story 20. I found my dog in a parking lot in a very industrial area, and no one claimed him at the shelter. I adopted him a few days before giving birth to my oldest child. He was with me for 14 years and witnessed my marriage, divorce, the births of both of my children, several moves, and countless other life events. Losing him was like losing a friend. Story 21. Saying goodbye to our home and many of our belongings because we had to flee from the war and conflicts. Story 22. My red-nosed pit bull, Lil Buckshot Jr., was shot by the police when I was 17. He was the best dog we ever had. Story 23. When my dad died on Thanksgiving in 2001, when I was 17, the next significant loss was when my wife and I had to put down our cat, Gus. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there, but I knew exactly when it was happening, and I felt emotional while working with chemicals on trees in a swamp. Story 24. My fiancé had just turned 54 when we were talking about finally saying our vows, my decision to give up my Brooklyn apartment, and our plans to buy a house in North Carolina. Less than a month later, he was on life support due to a heart attack caused by metastatic lung cancer. I screamed first, then kissed his forehead and held his hand as I spoke to him for the last time. Story 25. Pets for sure. They don't get to express their feelings to you like a human does. You worry that they are scared, feeling betrayed by you if euthanizing, or wondering why you can't help them if dying naturally. You reflect on all the times you took their presence for granted, how you ignored them because your hands were clean or you didn't want your outfit to get hair on it, or how you didn't throw the ball as often as you should or take them on walks. The grief of losing something that loved you so much, so unconditionally, and deserved more than you gave is just so hard. You can't communicate to them how much they meant to you, how you wish they could live longer, and how you will miss everything, including the inconveniences. At the end of the day, you learn this lesson and try harder for your next pet, but you still never give enough for what they deserve. Story 26. I moved in with a girl while I was in the service. She was nice and pretty, but we were just a train wreck. She had a 4-year-old son who was sunshine in a bottle. His father went to prison before he was old enough to know him. I became his dad, at least in his eyes, and I really loved that kid. I tried hard to be good, kind, and loving, and he returned the love tenfold. When I finished my enlistment, I knew I was heading back home and that she wasn't part of my future. She understood as well. It was time for us to part. But leaving that little boy crushed me. Crushed him too. It still hurts me 35 years later. I can hear his little voice saying, "Don't go, Daddy. Come back." Story 27. To my dad. He had a massive heart attack at the age of 50. By the time I arrived at the hospital, he was already gone, so I just held his hand for hours. Story 28. My husband was diagnosed with cancer in multiple areas. He never visited the doctors until it was too late. He passed away 10 days later. We were together for 26 years and married for 21. I never thought I would be a widow at 45, raising our 13-year-old without my best friend beside me. It has been tough. Story 29. My wife passed away 5 years ago. We were together for 34 years. I can't even begin to explain how much I miss her. Story 30. My mother, my father, and a cat I had named Misha were like family to me. I still cry for her today. Fortunately, due to my spiritual beliefs, I was able to connect with my parents. Story 31. When my mom got really sick, I isolated myself from almost everyone I spoke to for 2 years, and I ended the 6-year relationship I was in at that time. Story 32. My little pup's name was Mole, like Chicken Mole. His dad was Jalapeno, and his mom was named Margarita. I watched him be born. He was the runt and never weighed more than 5 pounds his entire life, but he was all heart and dedication. I was his human, and he was my little guy, my puppy. He was my constant companion, and I loved him so much. As he aged, he developed congestive heart failure, and I managed to help him feel good and stay alive and happy for another 10 months. Then, the week before Christmas, I woke up to a completely different dog. He was struggling, and I knew it was time. I called my kids, talked to my husband, and we went to the veterinarian. I held him and loved him while they injected him, and I saw the peace flood his eyes before his final breaths. I know he held on so long because he genuinely loved life and us. It's been just over a year, and I miss him like crazy. Story 33. My grandmother and I were very close, even in her later years when dementia affected her significantly. I visited her on one of her last days alive, and as I approached her bed, I knew it would be the last time I could see her. She was incoherent for most of my visit, but towards the end, as she was falling asleep, she recognized me and remembered who I was. Before she fell asleep, I took her by the arm and told her I loved her. She responded by saying she loved me too. A couple of days later, she passed away. But I am grateful I had the chance to say goodbye and that she was coherent enough to respond. Story 34. Saying goodbye to my sweet dog of 15 years is hard. I found her when I was 21 and said goodbye at 36. She was with me through the biggest changes in my adult life. Moving to a new state, going to graduate school, starting my first job, getting married, and buying a house. Story 35. My 2 cats who passed away hold a special place in my heart. The first was my very first cat, and the second, who was not even 2 years old, unfortunately had poor genetics. I was devastated and found it hard to contain my emotions. I am incredibly grateful to have had my significant other by my side during both events. I was a complete wreck. It may seem cold, but losing my cats was 100 times harder than any other loss I have experienced in my life, including the passing of my father. Story 36. When my cat became very unwell, the veterinarian said it was best to let him go. I stayed in the room while the veterinarian prepared the injection. My cat lifted his head one last time and looked at me. I sobbed all the way home. Story 37. My dad died in December 2020. He went in for surgery and never made it out. Watching my mom be broken for the last 4 years and him not being there to meet my youngest sibling or to cheer my sister on at her high school graduation next month continues to be difficult. Story 38. The dog that saved my life was my constant companion for almost 20 years. I cursed God, sobbed, and grieved for what felt like weeks when I had to say goodbye to her. Story 39. A friend who took his own life still affects me nearly 3 years later. I never really got to say goodbye to him. I saw him at work on Thursday, and I received a call Friday morning that he had died, which is why he missed work. The funeral was on Saturday, and I had to be back in the office on Monday. It was extremely difficult. Story 40. My mom, dad, and brother were not a surprise because of the medical history. When I woke up to my cat having a massive seizure, I didn't know it was coming. I think people love their pets because they are the ones there for you at 3 a.m. Story 41. Saying goodbye to my dad in 2023 was a profound experience. He was granted a medically assisted death at the age of 86. My mom had passed away earlier that year, and I did not have the opportunity to say a formal goodbye, as she was unconscious during the last week of her life. With my dad, however, it was different. Along with my siblings and other family members, we were present for the procedure and had the chance to say our goodbyes beforehand. That day was filled with a mix of emotions. We received confirmation that the procedure had been approved just 4 hours before he passed away. We spent that time sharing stories and primarily listened to him talk about his life, my mom, and us kids. He even sang a few songs for us, which was very special. He was suffering with no hope of recovery, so it was a relief for both him and us to know his suffering was coming to an end. Still, those last few hours were part of a very difficult goodbye. Story 42. Saying goodbye to Dad. Before he had his medication, we knew he would be gone. The last thing I did for him. Story 43. I said goodbye to the last of my 9 cats over 31 years. I've lost cats that were younger than her, but they started life with a lot of issues. She was my second purebred Bengal from a good breeder and declined rapidly with kidney failure at the age of 10. She spent 2 nights at the local pet emergency room. I went in at 8 a.m. with the blanket she sat on every night, and they let me hold her for 15 minutes. She was still very alert and wanted to roam around, but I didn't want to drag her out from under the small space under the sofas in the room, so I just held her and sobbed. I have already lost both parents, gone through 2 divorces, and lost a high school friend to suicide over the years, in addition to all the cats before her, but this was the worst because she was the last and the best. Story 44. Saying goodbye to my dad when he was already gone was difficult. I was 16 when he unexpectedly passed away, and I didn't fully process his death until 25 years later. I miss him so much daily. His passing motivated me to be a caring and devoted father to my kids. I love you, Dad, and thank you for exposing me to genuine and unconditional love as a child. Story 45. When my father was dying of cancer, I had to fly home to my children, knowing I would never see him again in this world. Story 46. Realizing that someone you loved unconditionally said something so hurtful that you can never see them the same way again leads you to choose to love them from a distance instead. Story 47. I have fortunately never had to lose a parent, sibling, or dog. I know that each loss will progressively get harder, and I also know that I am not prepared for it. I fear the day and tear up at the thought of having to say goodbye, especially when my dog passes. That being said, my ex-fiancée of several years left me and admitted to cheating on me for some months beforehand. Everything seemed perfect. I never saw any signs. She said, "I just don't love you anymore." That broke me, and it took well over 10 years, almost exactly, before I felt okay. I'm still healing. Being blindsided doesn't even begin to express the feeling. Story 48. The one I never got to say. My mom and I had a disagreement about me returning her phone calls. When I left that day, I made a sarcastic joke and never thought I wouldn't get to say goodbye to her. A few weekends later, I received a phone call from my father that my mom had suffered a serious heart attack. I was 6 hours away from home and got there as quickly as I could, but she was unresponsive and wouldn't come back to us. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to have a final conversation. It really hurts. Story 49. When I cut my biological father off because I realized he would never be the father I needed, I may not have cried, but it will never truly feel okay. Unfortunately, I still mourn that relationship. It took years to accept that trying was hurting me more than a final severance would. I never stopped loving him. Story 50. I had to say goodbye to a very good friend. 3 years ago, I was stuck in some really complex and toxic relationships. I constantly felt that I didn't deserve good friends, and the people in those friendships made me beg for their companionship. They always made me feel weak, and this went on for about 7 years. However, 3 years ago, a new friend entered my life, and we instantly became good friends. I started to leave my old toxic relationships behind and worked on building new, positive connections. This completely changed my perspective. My old friends began to realize that they needed me. It's a different story now. This new friend, who came into my life, transformed my world, and we became the best duo. Unfortunately, he had to leave after just a year, and it was very hard to let him go. Story 51. My grandmother fought cancer for a long time, but when the time came for hospice, she passed away less than a week later. A snowstorm was approaching, and I had an hour's drive to reach home. I kissed her cheek, told her I loved her, and reassured her it was okay to go. We would all be okay. She died about 5 minutes later, just as I was down the road. My partner informed me when I arrived home. Story 52. My grandmother passed away while I was on a plane returning home. I had to land, turn around, and go back the next day. Story 53. One of my best friends from childhood died in a car accident. I still remember her face from the funeral. Life can be so unfair sometimes. Story 54. Saying goodbye to my fiancé at the airport when I was 12 weeks pregnant on February 20th. I won't see him again until mid-August. Story 55. A dear grandmother of mine. She was married into our family and played a significant role in helping raise me. She was my number one babysitter, helped me whenever I needed support, loved me like her own, and gave me all the love and advice that I didn't receive from my own grandmother at times. She lived a hectic lifestyle that led to her sickness, starting with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and drinking, which eventually took its toll. After a long 2.5 week stay in the hospital, she was not improving. My aunt and uncle had to decide whether to let her go or keep trying, but later in the afternoon she went into cardiac arrest. She was resuscitated but remained in a coma, so the decision was made to let her go. We all took turns saying goodbye, and when it was time to remove life support, my mom, my uncle and aunt, and my cousin all held her arms and hands for 7 minutes until she officially passed away. It was definitely one of the hardest experiences I've ever been through. However, over time, I realized how much of a blessing and honor it was to be there with her in her last moments as she transitioned from one world to the next. It brings me immense peace knowing that she had all her closest loved ones right by her side. I know her spirit was happy when she left. I like to imagine that it made her journey a sweet one, seeing how loved she truly was. Story 56. Saying goodbye to my dad was incredibly difficult. He was my best friend, and I watched him slowly deteriorate from cancer over the course of a year. Being by his bedside and expressing my feelings before he passed was heartbreaking. I miss him dearly. He was the kindest, funniest man I have ever known. Story 57. My brother was dying from an overdose when I was 12. When the choice came, my mother couldn't tell them to let him go and just broke down, so I did, and she agreed. That was a hard moment. Then I had to say goodbye to my 52-year-old dad, who was dying from cancer that could have been totally curable if the doctors had taken him seriously. I hated the world. It's been 8 years, and I still cannot get over it. The fact that I was pregnant at that time and he will never know his grandsons makes it even harder. He would have been a perfect grandpa. Story 58. To my mother on the day she passed, we were all there. Came time to grab food, and my aunts asked me to go. Something in my gut said to please do this. I wanted to stay because I knew it was almost her time, but I went since it was down the street, and I figured it wouldn't take long. While I was collecting the order, I received a text from my aunt that my mom had officially passed. I was upset. I wanted to be there for that moment. At the same time, something told me that my mom didn't want me there for that moment, as if she didn't want me to see her like that. When I returned, I went to her side. I sat in the room with her body for a few minutes, holding her hand and telling her how much she mattered to me, how much I loved her, and how much I would miss her. She adopted me in 1997 when I was 7 years old. This was my hardest goodbye. Once again, I didn't have my mom, and I miss her so much now. Story 59. My best friend at work. We saw each other during breaks every day for 10 years. Then she left. Story 60. I have two. The first dog I ever had on my own as an adult was 12 years old. He and my now preteen son were best buddies, and having to put him down devastated me. That was almost 4 years ago, and I still cry when I talk about him. The second was my grandfather. He was on his deathbed, and I could only say goodbye over the phone because the company I worked for, named after a large river in South America, would not approve time off to go see him. My biggest regret to this day, when I was 26 and now almost 40, is that I didn't just tell them to leave me alone and go see my grandfather anyway. Story 61. My grandmother. Her daughter was struggling, had 4 children by the age of 23 and no career. She married someone who treated her children poorly. She took care of us as best as she could and even fed us at times. She always wanted us around and frequently informed my mother when she was behaving foolishly, which was quite often. She developed bone cancer and did not want to go to the hospital. The last time I saw her, she didn't even recognize me. She thought I was a nurse. I told her I had to go to work and that I was going to Ireland. I promised to bring her lots of presents. I assured her that no matter where I went, she would always be my mother. I knew I would never see her again. She passed away 2 days later. Story 62. When I lost my mentor, it was something special for sure. He was the dad I always wished I had. I spent so much time with him, and I am forever grateful. The 2-year anniversary was a few days ago. I miss him every day. I just hate that I don't have any pictures with him. Story 63. To my grandparents, who both passed away from dementia, and my pet Chinese water dragon, Sammy, who had to be euthanized at the age of 6 due to a neurological problem. It was heartbreaking. Story 64. My only older brother had just turned 41. He was battling cancer, and there was nothing more he could do. He entered hospice, and 2 days later he passed away. His wife was pregnant with my nephew. Story 65. When I was a kid, my white kitten, the first kitten I ever had, was killed by a car. My favorite uncle died that same summer, and I made the decision to attend the funeral. At that time, within our extended family, the adults generally did not bring kids to funerals. So my choice to attend was somewhat groundbreaking. It was the onset of the early stages of feeling deeper, more complex emotions, like a deep grief that did not seem to abate for a long time. I would sit in my backyard and think of my kitten and my uncle, wondering if I would ever be happy again. These feelings were complex and intense, and I had no idea what to do with them. The only person who seemed to understand was my grandma. 1 or 2 summers later, my favorite aunt had finished university and was set to relocate out west, joining another of my aunts and her family. I broke down several times over the course of the next month or 2, begging her not to go. Both times, school started shortly thereafter, and I was, in a manner of speaking, saved by the bell. Story 66. My grandmother. Watching her in pain from cancer in her last moments was the most difficult thing in the world. I was also angry because she had beaten cancer once, and now it was back and she didn't want to fight. I understood. She was 91. But I wished so badly she could have just passed in her sleep or from old age. My grandma and I were very close. I would often sleep over at her house. She picked me up and walked me home from school. I still haven't taken off the key to her house that she gave me. The house I grew up in is now demolished and doesn't even exist, but I can't let go. Ever since she died, I've been having consistent nightmares about her death. Next month marks 5 years. I don't even know how I'm supposed to work through that pain. I feel like there is not one thing I can do that doesn't remind me of her. Even small things, like warm mornings, remind me of sitting on the porch with her or running errands. I knew it would be painful, but it feels like a part of me has died that I will never get back. I wish I could hug her and just talk to her. It also hurts so badly because my grandma was loved by friends, the neighborhood, her church, our large family, and extended family. Since she died in 2020, more than half my family couldn't even attend her funeral because of restrictions. That is just another pain I'm still angry about, though I understand that was just the time. I just wish we could have celebrated her life as she deserved. Story 67. I took care of my grandmother, who had pancreatic cancer, in hospice at my home. She told me she didn't want to die in the hospital, so I moved everything out of my spare room. It was 2 weeks before she passed away. The night before she died, I held her hand and told her it was okay for her to go be with my grandfather, who passed away a month before I was born, and that she didn't need to be in pain anymore. I thanked her for raising and protecting me. She passed away in her sleep that evening. Story 68. My beloved dog had cancer, and there was nothing more I could do. I had to say goodbye too soon, and I still cry about the loss. Story 69. I was in the room with a few family members when one of my loved ones passed away in the hospital. I will remember each one, but my first adult dog was the one that truly affected me. He was 17 years old. It was his time, and there was no question that it was the right thing to do. I have experienced the loss of several peers and attended their funerals between the ages of 13 and 18, but I never had the chance to say goodbye. They were simply gone. Story 70. Euthanizing a pet is heartbreaking, but at least you get to say goodbye. Watching my senior cat walk down the block, turn back to look at me and my crying baby one more time, and then walk off, never to be seen again, is a memory I will never forget or forgive myself for. A man came to our door looking for work. My husband said he could clean the yard. The man asked me if I had any work his wife could do. I said she could do some ironing. She asked if her kids could come down to the basement washroom with her. That's where my cats hung out during the day, and they got tired of the kids bothering them, so they ran out the door. I occasionally let the cats be outside with me if I was outside with the kids. They never ran off. I called him from the porch, but I had a crying 1-year-old who needed to be put down for a nap, plus 6 and 4-year-olds who needed to be picked up from school. It was just a terrible mistake. Story 71. I had to put one of my cats down almost 10 years ago. I openly cried like a baby in front of everyone, but I didn't care. I insisted on being face to face with him for the entire process. My boy helped me through some seriously dark times, and while I felt it was best to spare him any pain that life may bring him at that point, I still felt like I was betraying him. In hindsight, I may have acted too quickly, and it pains me to think so. I wish I had had the presence of mind to give him chocolate and all the forbidden treats beforehand. My heart, what little is left of it, still has an open, bleeding hole in it, and I still turn on the faucets every anniversary at the time of his passing. This date and time are as ingrained in my memory as the day of my child's birth. I'll never forget him, and I miss him more than I can express. He gave me the best 15 years of my life. Total legend he is. Story 72. There are 2 significant times in my life when I experienced heartbreak. The first was when I was 17. The second was 2 years ago when I had to put my dog down. I had her for 13 years from the day she was born. Story 73. These are meaningful answers, though I would like to see more responses related to departures. Leaving a childhood friend for college, saying goodbye in a long-distance relationship, leaving for active service, and those painful hugs at the airport, after which you sit in your car wishing you'd hugged them tighter. Story 74. I would say my pet, but many have said this already. One of the hardest things I've had to come to terms with was realizing that someone I considered one of my best friends wasn't truly showing up for me. They never really made me a part of their life, only reaching out when they were single or when I initiated plans. Despite multiple efforts to address and improve things, I understood that they weren't acting like a true friend. It felt like I was just a placeholder until something better came along. The final straw was not being invited to their wedding or any other meaningful events. I didn't confront them, I just quietly let go. It was painful, especially after all the deep conversations and memories we shared, but I had to accept that the connection I valued didn't exist in the same way for them. Story 75. I met my brother for the first time when I was 28. I spent 2 weeks with him and his family, which was the first time I had any family to speak of. When it was time to fly home, I was a mess. Fortunately, on the plane, I was seated in a row by myself, and it was a long flight, so I had time to get myself together. Story 76. Long story short, I had a girlfriend when I was younger. We were in love with each other. She told me once that I was her first love. Over the years, we drifted apart a little. Nothing bad happened. I just struggled to keep up with people and maintain relationships, but I always knew she was someone I could spend my life with. At some point, I had to move to Florida, which I could not stand. I was miserable every day and wanted nothing more than to come back home to Pennsylvania. I had planned to attend college in Florida if I ended up being stuck there, which I did and obtained a degree from, but I had to live in the state for a year to establish residency first. During that time, I applied to jobs back home in the hope of getting a position and moving back. I had an interview for a job near where this girl had bought a house. I felt like it was one of those moments where the rest of your life begins. Everything seemed to be lining up perfectly. I was going to get this job, move back to Pennsylvania, live near this girl, and then we would be together again. Everything was finally coming together for me, and I was full of hope and excitement. I flew up to Pennsylvania for the interview. She offered to let me stay at her house, but I stayed at a relative's house for a couple of days instead, as that was my plan. She came over to see me one night, and it felt like I was in a dream. The job rejected me. Every hope and dream that existed in my life at that moment was shattered. Flying back to Florida was absolutely crushing. Felt like part of me died. Story 77. I ended my friendship with a girl I had feelings for because she didn't feel the same way. At first, I held on to hope that she might eventually develop feelings for me. But the lesson is that if someone doesn't like you, they simply don't like you. Even though it's been over 6 months, I still feel hurt and occasionally think about her. However, I can be content knowing that my feelings for her were genuine and not fleeting. In light of this experience, if I ever meet someone new in the future, I won't invest all my effort unless they show a similar level of interest. I won't reveal my vulnerability, show that I'm weak, or imply that I can't be happy without them. I've become more unbothered and unaffected. Story 78. My mom. It's so hard. I still haven't said it after 10 years. I'm still at the anger stage. I just can't. I just want her back. Story 79. I lost my first family pet, but I didn't feel too sad because she died of old age, and I knew she lived a good life. My second dog, whom I bought when I was young, holds special memories for me. I remember choosing her because all the other puppies ignored her. It was a cold day, so I placed her in my jacket pocket. She passed away a few years ago after developing a tumor that needed to be removed. Following the surgery, we had to give her pills for an infection. I came home one day to find her twitching on the floor, and I had to rush her to the veterinarian because they were about to close. Unfortunately, they had to euthanize her that day. Recently, our other dog, a husky, was diagnosed with cancer, which eventually made it hard for him to breathe. He was already having trouble walking. He spent the night at the veterinary clinic for observation, but we were faced with the choice of either euthanizing him that day or letting him live a few more weeks while watching his health decline. The hardest moment was seeing how happy he was when he saw me. He wanted to go home and see his brother again, but that couldn't happen. He laid on my lap and licked my hand until his last breath. Story 80. Watching my best friend die from opioid addiction was heartbreaking. I made several attempts to get him into rehabilitation and prevent this outcome, but eventually, I reached a point where I felt powerless to stop him. It was almost a relief to see his name in the obituary a few weeks ago. Story 81. Recently, I was with a man I thought I would grow old with. He is not emotionally available for a deeply committed relationship. I am heartbroken. Story 82. I am not mentally stable enough to read more than a few of these posts. They are all so familiar to me. Story 83. Goodbyes are hardest when they involve deep emotional connections, whether it is losing a loved one, ending a meaningful relationship, or leaving behind a place that feels like home. The most painful goodbyes often come with a sense of unfinished business or the knowledge that things will never be the same. Story 84. Paternal grandfather. I was with him when he passed away from cancer. I was only 25 years old. I was very close to him. Story 85. Saying goodbye to my mom for the last time. She was in hospice and was not expected to live much longer. I had already been away from work for too long and was running low on money and family leave, but she was still holding on. I had to give her one last hug and goodbye before heading to the airport to fly home. It was the second worst flight I have ever taken. The worst was on the way to see her. She went into a coma the following night and passed away a few days later. Story 86. A close friend took their life when we were teenagers. The shock, the questions, the grief. I just wasn't old enough to process any of it. Story 87. To my mom. I didn't know it was a goodbye at the time. Her health was failing, and she could barely speak towards the end. She told me she loved me, and I told her the same. It was the first time in months that her words came out clearly. She died shortly after the last time I saw her. I remember telling her that last time, "Okay, Mom, I'm going to see you tomorrow." She shook her head at me like she didn't want me to come by, and now I know why. She died shortly after that day. Story 88. Saying goodbye to my grandma every 2 to 3 years is difficult. She lives far away, and each time I hug her goodbye, I worry it might be the last time. We both end up crying as we say our goodbyes. Story 89. My dog that just passed away and my little cousin who died on my 21st birthday both died in my arms. They are not the only loved ones to pass away in my arms, but they were definitely the hardest to endure. Story 90. We lost our dog, Sam, about a month ago. It was completely unexpected. At 9 in the evening, he was fine. By 9:40, we were on the phone with the veterinarian because his breathing seemed odd. By 10, we were in the car taking him to the emergency veterinary clinic. He was gone before 1 the next morning. Raise a glass to him. Story 91. Grandparents were right there beside them when they were declared dead. A close second would be pets, when their warmth slowly fades and you can't feel their breathing anymore. A close third is my ex-girlfriend. Story 92. I was 14 years old in a parking lot in Oklahoma, saying goodbye to my first love as I moved to North Carolina. I'll never forget watching her old, cheap car drive away. It's one of the few memories etched in my mind that brings me back to that moment as if it were happening now. That was 24 years ago. Story 93. My grandpa passed away due to COVID in 2020. I had to say goodbye over the phone. It was the first and last time I told him how much he meant to me. Story 94. My cat, whom I've had since I was 14, passed away 2 months ago at the age of 16. My heart is completely shattered, and life feels empty without him. Story 95. My last great-grandparent passed away approximately 2.5 years ago. She had the flu, pneumonia, and we believe she also had COVID-19. She was 86 years old. Story 96. I watched my mom take her last breath after she slowly died in the hospital for a week, unable to communicate with us during that time. I was 17. I had brain surgery the following month. Story 97. My grandma passed away last year. It was unexpected, and I fell to my knees. Today, though not as hard, I had to put my sweet cat to sleep. Story 98. It will come yet. My 18-year-old cat has been diagnosed with diabetes, and even though he responds well to the insulin, the veterinarian doesn't expect him to be as good as he is now for another year. I know what is coming, but I do not want to know. Story 99. My friend and I both got shot. I survived, but he did not. However, he lived long enough for me to talk to him before he passed away. Story 100. The one opportunity one never had was when I was 11, living with my mom and stepdad. My mom had cancer, but I had no idea how serious it was. My dad came over, and for some reason, we went to his house for the night. I didn't mind, as it meant I could play my game past my bedtime since my dad was laid back. The next morning, I was abruptly woken by my dad telling me to go into my sister's room. I sat on her bed as he woke her up and said, "There's no easy way to say this. Your mom passed away this morning. I don't ever remember saying goodbye to her." Story 101. The last time I visited my grandmother, I knew it would be the final visit. She was dying from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and I was flying back home later that day. She was like a second mother to me. The harsh reality of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is that while your body is deteriorating and you can't eat or speak, your mind remains clear. We both understood it would be the last time. I find it difficult to think about it too much because the overwhelming sadness takes over. Story 102. Saying goodbye to my mother after she spent 5 days on life support. She had a major stroke and could not recover. I miss her dearly every day. Story 103. Putting my pet to sleep and watching them drift away, knowing it was a decision I made, is absolutely heartbreaking. Story 104. Pets can be challenging. I had to put my cat to sleep a week ago, so that is still fresh in my mind. I also lost a dog in November. Saying goodbye to my mother was probably the most heart-wrenching experience. Story 105. Every time I feel hope that maybe I won't be alone forever, I am reminded that I will be. I have to say goodbye to the dream of love, happiness, joy, and a future. I am letting go of the idea of having children, having my own family, and being someone's choice instead of their obligation. Story 106. My mother passed away in the hospital 12 years ago. I still miss her every day. Story 107. I wouldn't say it was the hardest, but the experience that stands out the most in my mind is taking my friend to turn himself in. Story 108. To my mother as I was leaving home. Our family is a disaster. My childhood was difficult. I never had a stress-free day growing up. Still, I feel for my mother. Her life wasn't easy either. I know she is a hurt woman who never experienced love, so she wasn't able to give me any. I know she didn't want to hurt me. As an adult, I tried to save our relationship, but I was the only one working on it. It cost me a lot of time, energy, and money. One day, I realized things would never work the way they should. I would never be embraced. There would never be trust. I packed the last few things I was keeping in my mother's home and left. I simply said goodbye. She replied the same. Our voices were broken. I think she wanted to hug me, which she never did, only once after she hurt me too much. I know she started crying after I closed the door. Something inside me died. I miss the mother that's inside this woman, the one I was never introduced to. I know she's there, but my mother won't allow me to meet her. She used to ask my sister how I was doing. She didn't have the strength to contact me directly. Now she doesn't even do that anymore. I think she's trying to forget I ever existed. Story 109. My grandpa passed away last fall. The last thing he said to me was, "You probably won't see me again." Story 110. Mentioning what others have mentioned about pet loss, it hit especially hard because not only was my cat depending on me for help, she also helped me more than she knew. Her name was Gracie. My family adopted her when I was about 6 years old, and we euthanized her in 2023 when I was 20. She lived a long, beautiful life, but we were never particularly close until the last 6 to 8 months before her death. I became incredibly ill due to endometriosis and adenomyosis. I was in pain every day, and somehow she knew because she never left my side. Seriously, she'd be on the bathroom counter while I brushed my teeth and lying on my chest whenever I got in bed. I'll admit I became a little codependent on her comfort. Having her there helped ease the pain. She was a magical little girl full of warmth. The way she drastically deteriorated before her death was traumatic. It all happened so fast. The night before her euthanasia appointment, she fought hard to be with me in my bed during one of my pain episodes. I left the room for a minute and came back to find that she had slipped off the bed trying to find me and was curled up, face down on the floor, looking very confused. Throughout the night, she fell a few more times, and I decided to put her in the bathroom with my pillows and blankets so she wouldn't roam and injure herself. It was so painful. The morning of her death, I had my own little last moment with her, and she was purring so loudly. She was lying on her favorite pillow. It hurts so much to say goodbye to your childhood best friend. We found out that she was extremely ill. We had no clue because she hid it from us. Her kidneys were almost completely failing, and the vet's tests showed extremely concerning results. Their computers couldn't even register how much her body was struggling. I miss her every day. My little calico baby. I called her my mama kitty because that's what she was. She took care of me. I'm still fighting my illness without her. But that's fine because now I'm doing it for her. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.